Hello everyone, welcome to Sleep Space. Tonight we will talk about one of the most mysterious and profound questions humans have ever asked. What happens after death, and more specifically, do we in some way reunite with ourselves? When life ends, do we dissolve into nothingness? Or is there some continuity, some hidden dimension where our consciousness persists? Could it be that what we truly are is not destroyed, but rather rediscovered, perhaps even rejoined with something deeper within us that has been there all along? This is the journey we'll take tonight. It is not about arriving at a final answer, but about opening the doors of imagination, philosophy, science, and spirit to consider what this possibility might mean. When you lie down to sleep, you already undergo a small rehearsal of death. You let go of waking awareness and surrender to a state you cannot control. And yet every morning you awaken as if nothing has happened. Ancient thinkers noticed this parallel and wondered if perhaps sleep and death share a secret thread, one that might lead us to understanding whether consciousness is truly extinguished or if it is transformed. And if transformed, could we find ourselves reunited with something essential, something greater, something that has always been hidden beneath the surface of everyday life? Throughout history, people have asked whether the self, the sense of I am, is a temporary illusion, a flicker created by the brain, or whether it is a fundamental reality of the universe. If it is merely the brain's creation, then perhaps it dissolves with the body. But if it is something deeper, woven into the very fabric of existence, then it may not only survive death, but return to a source that is both familiar and eternal. Philosophers in ancient India spoke of Atman, the true self, a spark of consciousness identical to Brahman, the universal whole. According to them, death is not an end, but a return, a reunion with what we really are. In Greece, Plato imagined the soul as immortal, cycling through lives and returning again and again to the realm of truth before being reborn. In many mystical traditions, the self you think you are, the personality, the memories, the daily chatter of the mind, is not the real you at all. It is more like a mask, and death is when the mask is taken off. But modern science approaches this puzzle differently. Neuroscience tells us that the self is constructed by the brain, a kind of ongoing story created by electrical signals and networks of neurons. If that is true, then when the body dies, so too does the story. Yet, even among scientists, there is no complete explanation for consciousness itself, how it arises, why it exists, or why there is a subjective experience of being alive at all. This is known as the hard problem of consciousness. Because of this, some researchers suggest consciousness may not be confined to the brain. Instead, it may be a fundamental property of the universe, like space, time, or energy. If that is the case, then what we call self might not vanish, but return to its underlying source, much like a drop of water falling back into the ocean. Think for a moment about how strange it is to exist at all. Out of all possible arrangements of atoms and molecules, here you are, listening, aware, alive. This awareness, the sense of me, is not easily explained. If awareness itself is fundamental, then perhaps death is not a disappearance, but a rejoining. Some have described it as remembering what you really are, as if waking from a long dream. The question of reuniting with yourself also brings up the mystery of time. Right now, you feel like a single stream of experiences unfolding moment by moment. But some theories in physics suggest that all moments exist simultaneously, past, present, and future. If that is true, then maybe the self you think of as past you or future you still exists somewhere. Perhaps death is not an ending, but a shift in perspective, where all versions of you converge. Imagine meeting not just who you were in this life, but who you were across all possible lives, all possibilities that consciousness explored. That kind of reunion would be beyond words, beyond imagination. There is also the question of memory. If we reunite with ourselves, will we remember who we were? Or is memory itself tied only to the brain, lost when the body ceases? Some traditions suggest that while personal memory may fade, the deeper essence of self, the awareness that underlies thought, remains untouched. What if what we call you is like a wave rising from the ocean? The shape of the wave is temporary, but the water itself never disappears. Death may simply be the moment when the wave falls back into the sea, and in doing so, it becomes not less but more, reunited with the vastness it always belonged to. As we begin this exploration, it is important to recognize that no one has a final answer. People have near-death experiences, visions, or spiritual awakenings that give them glimpses of what might lie beyond, but none of these are definitive. Yet the very act of wondering opens something inside us. To ask whether we reunite with ourselves after death is to ask what it truly means to be alive, what it means to be conscious, and whether the deepest parts of us are bound by time, space, or even the fragile body we inhabit. Tonight, we will travel across ideas, scientific theories, ancient philosophies, mystical traditions, and even modern accounts that challenge our ordinary view of reality. At times, these ideas will contradict each other, but together they form a rich tapestry of possibility. The goal is not to prove or disprove, but to open the mind to wonder, to allow yourself to consider the extraordinary possibility that death is not the end, but a transformation. And so, as you relax into this journey, think of it not as searching for certainty, but as an exploration into mystery. The idea that we may reunite with ourselves after death is as much about life as it is about dying. It is about what we really are beneath the surface, beyond the stories, beyond the masks. We first have to ask, what is the self? If we don't clearly know what we mean by self while alive, how can we understand what it might mean to reunite with it after life ends? In everyday life, you feel like you are a continuous being. You wake up, go about your day, remember your past, plan for your future. All of this creates a strong sense that there is an inner identity at the center, an observer who is always present. Yet when examined closely, that sense of continuity becomes slippery. The brain constantly changes. Neurons fire differently from moment to moment. Your body replaces its cells over the years. Even your personality and memories shift with time. The you of today is not exactly the you of 10 years ago. So what is it that truly carries through? Philosophers have debated this for thousands of years. In Buddhism, the doctrine of anatta teaches that the self is an illusion. There is no permanent, unchanging soul. Instead, what we call self is just a collection of processes, sensations, perceptions, thoughts, and consciousness, all constantly flowing like a river. When death comes, the river disperses, and nothing fixed remains. Yet, paradoxically, Buddhism also suggests that awareness can transcend, that freedom comes when one realizes there was never a separate self to begin with. In this view, reuniting with yourself may mean recognizing that the self was never separate from reality at all. In contrast, Hindu philosophy speaks of Atman, the eternal self, which is not destroyed by death but returns to Brahman, the infinite reality. According to this perspective, what dies is only the body and the personality, but the true essence remains. This essence is not something that belongs to you, it is you. Death becomes a kind of homecoming, a merging with the source. To reunite with yourself in this sense means to awaken to the truth that you were always more than the temporary form you inhabited. Modern psychology offers another lens. It distinguishes between different layers of the self. The narrative self, the story you tell yourself about who you are, the social self, how others see you, and the core self, the immediate sense of being alive in this moment. When people ask if we survive death, they often mean the narrative self will, I, with my memories and experiences, continue. But perhaps the reunion lies not in preserving every detail of memory, but in returning to that core awareness that exists before stories. Think of how, in deep meditation, thoughts and identities may quiet down, leaving only presence. If such presence is fundamental, then perhaps death is a deeper meditation, one in which we remember ourselves not as a character, but as the consciousness that allows any character to exist. Science complicates the picture even more. Neuroscience suggests that the self emerges from brain activity, a complex but ultimately physical phenomenon. Experiments with brain injuries, neurological disorders, and psychedelic states show how fragile the sense of self can be. Damage to certain brain areas can erase memories or alter identity so drastically that it challenges the idea of a single, unchanging self. From this angle, the self seems to be a construction, something the brain produces and sustains. If the brain dies, the self dissolves. Yet even here, the mystery remains. If consciousness were merely a product of matter, why should matter ever produce subjective experience at all? Why should there be something it is like to be alive? This is where theories like panpsychism enter the conversation. Panpsychism suggests that consciousness is not an emergent property, but a fundamental feature of the universe, present in some form even in the simplest particles. Just as matter and energy exist everywhere, consciousness too may pervade reality. In this view, your personal self is a temporary configuration of a universal consciousness. Death would then be not annihilation, but dissolution back into that universal awareness. To reunite with yourself could mean rediscovering the broader consciousness that has always been the ground of your being. Quantum physics has also fueled speculation. Some interpretations suggest that consciousness plays a role in the unfolding of reality, perhaps even shaping outcomes at the quantum level. While many scientists caution against overstating this connection, it raises the tantalizing possibility that consciousness is woven into the structure of the universe in ways we barely grasp. If that is so, then the death of the body might not mean the death of consciousness. Instead, consciousness might shift states, as energy does, never destroyed but transformed. Near-death experiences, often described by people who were clinically dead but revived, provide another window. Reports of floating outside the body, travelling through tunnels of light, meeting deceased loved ones, or experiencing a profound sense of unity are surprisingly consistent across cultures. Many describe an overwhelming feeling of homecoming, as though they were returning to something deeply familiar. Skeptics argue these experiences can be explained by oxygen deprivation, chemical surges in the brain, or hallucinations. Yet the people who experience them often come back profoundly changed, convinced that what they saw was more real than ordinary life. If their experiences are glimpses of what lies beyond, perhaps death does bring a reunion with a deeper self, a homecoming to a consciousness larger than the individual mind. Think also about dreams. In dreams, you inhabit another self entirely, sometimes with different memories, different fears, even a different personality. Yet when you wake, all those dream identities collapse back into the one who is dreaming. Could death be like waking from the dream of life, where all the roles you've played across time and space dissolve into the dreamer that has been dreaming them all? In that moment, reunion would not mean meeting someone else, but realizing that you were the dreamer all along. Time itself complicates the question of selfhood. Physics suggests that time may not flow the way we experience it. The block universe theory proposes that all moments exist simultaneously, like pages in a book. In that model, your birth, your death, and every moment in between are already there, eternally present. If that is true, then you never truly cease to exist. Instead, death may simply be the shift of perspective away from one moment to another. To reunite with yourself in that sense might mean seeing the entire book at once. Past selves, present selves, future selves, all coexisting in a timeless whole. Mystical traditions often describe enlightenment as precisely this kind of seeing. To awaken is to realize that the self is not just this momentary character, but the totality. What dies is the costume, not the actor. The reunion is the actor remembering who they are when the play is over. There is also the question of whether death reunites us not only with ourselves, but with others. Many who have had near-death experiences report meeting loved ones, as if the boundary between self and other dissolves. If we are all expressions of the same consciousness, then to reunite with yourself after death might also mean to reunite with everyone, because at the deepest level, there was never a separation. This brings us to the idea of the collective unconscious, proposed by Carl Jung. Jung believed that beneath individual psychology lies a shared layer of mind, filled with archetypes and universal patterns. Perhaps death is the moment when the individual mind dissolves back into that collective unconscious, where personal identity is absorbed into something greater. In that merging, reunion happens not as a preservation of the individual ego, but as a return to the shared source of humanity itself. But is reunion desirable? The ego often resists the idea of dissolving, clinging to its identity. We want to continue as me, with our memories and personality intact, yet consider how limited that self is. You are bound by fears, habits, and the narrow perspective of a single lifetime. If death frees you from those limits, the reunion might not be the loss of self, but the gaining of something infinitely larger. What if the small self is like a drop of water afraid to fall into the ocean, only to discover that in doing so, it becomes the ocean itself? Reunion with yourself after death may also mean integration of what was ignored in life. Throughout your lifetime, you suppress parts of yourself, forgotten dreams, hidden fears, unexpressed potentials. In psychology, this is known as the shadow. Some traditions suggest that death is when the shadow can no longer be hidden, when the totality of who you are comes into the light. In that sense, to reunite with yourself would mean to face and embrace all aspects of your being, finally whole. Art and literature have long echoed these ideas. From Dante's journey through the afterlife to modern films about memory and identity, the theme of discovering the self beyond death recurs again and again. This reflects a deep intuition within humanity that there is something more, something waiting beyond the veil. Of course, skepticism remains essential. From a strictly materialist perspective, the self is fragile and temporary. Consciousness ends with the body, and reunion is an illusion. Yet even this view leaves questions unanswered. Why does subjective experience exist at all? Why should matter, arranged in a certain way, feel like anything? If consciousness is fundamental, then perhaps the materialist view is only part of the picture. Ultimately, whether reunion after death is real or not, contemplating it changes how we live. If you believe the self ends at death, life becomes more precious, urging you to live fully now. If you believe the self continues, life becomes a preparation for transformation, an unfolding into something greater. Either way, the mystery deepens your appreciation for existence. In asking whether we reunite with ourselves after death, we are really asking what it means to exist, what it means to be aware, and what lies at the core of reality. Each perspective, scientific, philosophical, spiritual, offers a piece of the puzzle. Perhaps the truth is larger than any single perspective can capture. Birth is in many ways the mirror image of death. Before you were born, there was no you in the ordinary sense. No memories, no personality, no awareness of the world. Yet out of that silence, a sense of self appeared. If it can appear once, could it appear again? Or could it be that the you who exists now was never truly absent, but only hidden, waiting to re-emerge? In many traditions, birth and death are seen not as absolute beginnings or endings, but as doorways. Life is what happens between them, and what passes through the door is consciousness itself. If that is true, then death is not the destruction of self, but the re-entry into a state that preceded life. This raises the question, did you exist in some form before your birth? And if so, what does that mean about what happens after death? Plato believed that the soul existed before birth, dwelling in a realm of pure knowledge. To him, learning in life was not about acquiring new information, but about remembering what the soul already knew. Death, then, was a return to that state. To reunite with yourself would mean remembering that larger self, the one that existed before and will exist after this brief passage through time. Eastern philosophies echo this with the concept of reincarnation. Life is seen as one chapter in a vast cycle, where consciousness moves from form to form, gathering experiences. The self that reincarnates is not the personality or the memory, but the deeper consciousness that underlies them. If this is true, then death is not a final curtain, but a turning of the page. The reunion might be less about meeting your old self again, and more about realizing you have always been the continuity between lifetimes. From a scientific point of view, reincarnation is difficult to prove, yet there are curious cases of children who seem to recall details of past lives with uncanny accuracy. Names, places, events they could not have learned otherwise. While skeptics argue for coincidence or suggestion, the sheer volume of these stories raises questions. Could they be evidence that consciousness persists beyond death, carrying fragments of self across time? If so, then reunion might take the form of slowly piecing together the larger mosaic of all your lives, seeing how each fragment adds up to a greater whole. But what if, instead of moving from one life to another, all lives exist simultaneously? Some interpretations of quantum physics suggest multiple realities or parallel universes. If each decision branches into new possibilities, then countless versions of you may exist in parallel. Death, then, might be the moment when all those branches converge. Imagine meeting not only the person you were in this life, but also the selves who lived out every road not taken. To reunite with yourself in that scenario would be a vast awakening, a merging of infinite possibilities into one awareness. This idea raises another fascinating question. Do we exist as individuals at all, or are we expressions of something much larger? Neuroscience shows that the brain is not a fixed organ, but a dynamic system, constantly rewriting itself through neuroplasticity. Memory, identity, even personality shift over time. What we call self is less like a solid statue and more like a flowing river. If the river flows into the sea at death, perhaps reunion means realizing you were never separate from the sea to begin with. Carl Jung's idea of the collective unconscious pushes this further. Beneath the surface of your individual mind lies a vast reservoir of shared archetypes and symbols, inherited by all humanity. Dreams, myths, and spiritual visions often draw from this deep well. If death dissolves the barrier between the personal and the collective, then reuniting with yourself could mean reuniting with the entire human story. In that sense, the you who continues after death is not only the personal consciousness, but the larger mind that connects all beings. Mystics across cultures describe experiences of unity that sound strikingly similar. They speak of a dissolving of boundaries, of merging with light, of feeling one with all things. These are described not as losses of self, but as expansions. The individual identity is seen as a veil, and when it lifts, what is revealed is a deeper truth. Death, from this perspective, may be the ultimate unveiling, the final recognition of who and what you truly are. Yet this raises a paradox. If reuniting with yourself after death means dissolving into something larger, is there still a you to experience it? The ego fears that without its individuality, there is nothing left. But imagine a drop of water merging into the ocean. Does the drop cease to exist, or does it become more than it was, expanding into a vastness it could never have contained on its own? The reunion may not be the survival of the small self, but the discovery that the small self was always part of something infinite. Near-death experiences often describe something similar. People report feelings of indescribable love, of being surrounded by light, of encountering a presence that feels both deeply familiar and unimaginably vast. Some interpret this as meeting God, others as meeting their higher self. In either case, the experience is described as a reunion, returning to a home they had forgotten, but always belonged to. Skeptics argue that these experiences can be explained biologically: chemical surges in the brain, hallucinations caused by lack of oxygen, or the mind's attempt to comfort itself in crisis. Yet those who undergo them often come back changed, less afraid of death, more open to life. Even if they are illusions, they reveal something profound. The human psyche longs for reunion, longs to believe that death is not the end, but the return to something essential. This longing shows up in countless myths and stories. Heroes descend into the underworld, confront death, and emerge transformed, often with greater wisdom. These myths reflect the human intuition that death is not mere erasure, but transition. The underworld journey is symbolic of dying to the small self and awakening to the larger one. Perhaps the ultimate reunion is not after death, but through life itself, learning before the body ends to connect with that deeper source. Modern physics also offers metaphors for this possibility. Energy cannot be destroyed, it only changes form. Matter too is never lost, only rearranged. If consciousness is somehow tied to the fundamental fabric of the universe, then why should it be different? Death may be the rearrangement of awareness, the dispersal of a temporary pattern into the greater whole. To reunite with yourself might be to realize you were always the whole, wearing the temporary mask of individuality. Consider, too, the role of memory. One fear about death is the loss of all we have known. But memory, even in life, is fragile. We forget more than we remember. What you consider your story is already a partial, shifting version of events. Yet beneath memory lies something deeper, the raw sense of being alive, the awareness that says, I am. That awareness exists in every moment, before thought, before memory. If that awareness is fundamental, then death does not erase it. It may erase the details of your story, but the essence remains. Reunion, then, would be remembering the deeper truth, that you are not your memories, but the awareness in which memories arise. Spiritual teachers often use metaphors for this. One is the mirror and the reflections. Life is like the reflections, changing images, appearing and disappearing. But the mirror itself never changes, never disappears. Death may be the moment when the reflections fade, and you realize you are the mirror, not the images within it. To reunite with yourself is to rediscover the mirror, the timeless awareness that was always there. Some might ask, what about the darker aspects of self? Do we reunite with those as well? If reunion means wholeness, then it cannot exclude the shadow, the parts of ourselves we reject or fear. Many traditions speak of judgment after death, not as punishment, but as a confrontation with the truth of who we are. To reunite with yourself may mean facing the fullness of your being, embracing the shadow as well as the light. Only in that embrace does true wholeness emerge. In this sense, death could be understood as the final act of healing. The conflicts and divisions of life dissolve, the masks fall away, and what remains is the undivided self. Whether this is seen as merging with God, returning to the source, or simply dissolving into the fabric of reality, the essence is the same, a homecoming. Even science, cautious as it is, leaves space for mystery. The brain may explain how thoughts and identity arise, but it has not solved why awareness exists at all. Until that mystery is resolved, the possibility remains open that consciousness is more than a byproduct of matter. And if it is, then perhaps death is not the end of awareness, but a doorway into its greater reality. Every culture has its myths, stories, and teachings about what happens beyond the final breath. Although the details differ, a common theme runs through them: the belief that something essential survives, something that carries the imprint of you. Take ancient Egypt, for example. Egyptians believed that a person was composed of multiple aspects: the Ka, vital essence, the Br, personality, and the Ak, spirit. At death, these parts separated, but with proper rituals, they could reunite and live on in the afterlife. To them, death was not a dissolution, but a reconfiguration. The journey of the soul through the underworld was filled with trials, culminating in the weighing of the heart against the feather of truth. If the heart was light, the soul could reunite with its eternal essence. Here, reunion meant restoration of wholeness, a return to harmony. In Norse mythology, fallen warriors were carried to Valhalla, where they joined their ancestors in eternal feasting. Though violent and mythic in imagery, the underlying theme is the same: death brings a reunion, not just with oneself, but with one's deepest identity as a warrior, fulfilled and eternalized. Christian traditions speak of resurrection and eternal life. The idea is that the soul persists after death and reunites with God, with judgment serving as the test of purity. The language is often one of returning home, of finally being whole in the presence of the divine. In this case, reunion with oneself is inseparable from reunion with God, suggesting that the deepest self is not independent but rooted in the divine source. Similarly, in Islamic teachings, the afterlife is portrayed as a continuation of existence, where souls are judged and either rewarded or punished. Yet even here, the concept of reunion persists. The soul's journey returns it to its creator, to the essence from which it came. Whether in paradise or otherwise, death is not the annihilation of self, but its transformation into a state aligned with divine will. What's fascinating is that across these traditions, reunion is tied not only to survival of the soul, but to transformation. Death is rarely imagined as a continuation of the self exactly as it was in life. Instead, it is a refinement, a purification, a process of becoming more truly what one always was. In this sense, to reunite with yourself after death means to meet your essence, stripped of illusions, distractions, and flaws. But let's step away from myth for a moment and return to what we know scientifically. consider the role of energy. Physics tells us that energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. The energy that animates your body does not vanish at death. It changes form, disperses into the environment. Your atoms too return to the earth, to air, to stars. In this sense, you are reunited with the cosmos, with the very matter from which you came. But what about consciousness? If consciousness is a kind of energy, could it follow the same law, never destroyed, only transformed? Some scientists, like Roger Penrose, have suggested that consciousness might be linked to quantum processes within the brain. If that is true, consciousness could interact with the universe at a fundamental level, persisting in ways we do not yet understand. Penrose and others have speculated about quantum information being preserved after death, woven into the fabric of space-time itself. While this remains speculative, it suggests that reunion might mean the reintegration of consciousness with the quantum field that underlies reality. This idea resonates with mystical traditions that describe death as merging with the universal mind, the source from which all thought arises. It also aligns with the intuition many people have after losing loved ones, that the person is not gone but present in some unseen way, not erased but transformed. Perhaps the reunion is not about preserving the details of individuality, but about rediscovering one's place in the whole. At the same time, the idea of reunion with oneself raises a profound psychological question. What parts of you are eternal, and what parts are temporary? Your memories may fade, your body certainly changes, and your personality is shaped by countless external factors. But beneath all of this lies the undeniable fact of awareness, the raw sense of I am. This sense of presence is not tied to any particular memory or story. It exists right now, as it always has. Even if everything else falls away, the presence remains. Could death simply reveal that presence more clearly, stripped of the clutter of identity? Imagine awareness as light passing through a stained glass window. In life, the window colors and shapes the light, creating a particular pattern. Your personality, your story, your individuality. At death, the window shatters, but the light does not disappear. It continues, pure and unchanged. The reunion with yourself might be the recognition that you were always the light, never just the pattern. But this view is not without challenges. Many fear the loss of individuality, the unique personality that makes them who they are. The thought of dissolving into something greater can feel like annihilation rather than reunion. Yet perhaps this fear is a trick of perspective. From the perspective of the small self, letting go feels like death. From the perspective of the greater self, it feels like awakening. This is why so many spiritual traditions emphasize practice, whether meditation, prayer, or contemplation, as a way of preparing for death. These practices train the mind to loosen its grip on identity, to taste moments of union with the greater whole. In those glimpses, one finds not fear, but peace. Death, then, becomes not a rupture, but a final release into what has already been experienced in part. There are also more personal accounts to consider. Stories of near-death experiences often include descriptions of life reviews, where the individual sees their entire life laid out before them, not as a sequence of memories, but as a whole. In these reviews, people report feeling not only their own experiences, but also the emotions of those they affected. This suggests that reunion is not just with oneself, but with the interconnected web of relationships that shaped one's life. To reunite with yourself after death may mean to see yourself in totality, not as an isolated being, but as part of the vast network of existence. What's striking is how often these experiences are described as deeply familiar, as though the person is not discovering something new, but remembering something forgotten. This sense of familiarity points again to the possibility that reunion is not a future event, but a return to a state that has always been. Death simply clears away the distractions so that truth can be seen. Even if we look at death purely through a materialist lens, the mystery persists. Consciousness, despite all advances in neuroscience, remains unexplained. How do electrical signals in the brain give rise to subjective experience? Why should matter ever become aware? This gap in understanding leaves room for possibilities that science has yet to grasp. Until we can explain why consciousness exists, we cannot rule out the idea that it may persist beyond death in some form we do not yet understand. And so, reunion with yourself after death remains an open question. It may mean returning to an eternal soul, as many religions teach. It may mean dissolving into universal consciousness, as mystics describe. It may mean surviving in memories and stories, as psychologists suggest. Or it may mean that the sense of self vanishes, but the deeper mystery of awareness continues in ways beyond comprehension. Perhaps the most profound truth is that death itself forces us to confront the mystery of who we are. In life, we often take the self for granted, assuming it to be solid and continuous. But in the face of death, we must ask, what am I really? And in asking, we may come closer to discovering that the self is both more fragile and more eternal than we ever imagined. In contemplating reunion, we glimpse a paradox. The self that fears death cannot survive it, but the awareness that underlies the self may never have been born, and thus cannot die. To reunite with yourself after death may simply mean realizing that the awareness you are is not bound by birth or death, but it's the canvas upon which all of life is painted. It's tempting to imagine it as a future event, something that will happen later, once this life has ended. But what if the reunion is not about time at all? What if it is about perspective, about shifting how we see reality? To explore this, we need to look more closely at time, memory, and the strange way consciousness seems to exist both within and beyond them. Time feels linear in daily life. We are born, we live, we die. The past is behind us, the future lies ahead. But many physicists argue that time may not flow the way it appears. The block universe theory suggests that all moments exist simultaneously. Past, present, and future are like pages in a book. Already there, already written. If that is true, then your death is not the end of you, because the you that lived is still present in those pages. You do not vanish, you remain, preserved in the fabric of space-time. From that perspective, reunion with yourself is not about going somewhere new after death, but about awakening to the fact that all versions of you already coexist, eternally present. This idea leads to fascinating possibilities. Could death be the moment when awareness shifts from experiencing one page at a time to seeing the whole book? Imagine suddenly having access to every moment of your life, every choice you ever made, every possibility that branched off. In that instant, you would be reunited not only with the you of today, but with every version of yourself across time. Reunion would mean integration, the recognition that all those selves are facets of one greater whole. This idea echoes certain spiritual teachings. In Hinduism, the concept of Atman, the true self, transcends time. The self you experience day to day is bound by time, but Atman exists beyond it. To realize Atman is to realize that you were never born and will never die. Death does not end you. It merely shifts the viewpoint from the limited to the infinite. Similarly, in Buddhism, enlightenment is described as seeing beyond the illusion of time and self. awakening to the timeless nature of awareness. In that sense, reuniting with yourself after death might simply be the ultimate awakening, the final recognition of what has always been true. But what about memory? Memory gives us the sense of continuity, the feeling that we are the same person from moment to moment. Without memory, would there still be a self to reunite with? Neuroscience shows that memory is fragile, constantly reconstructed, and often unreliable. Patients with amnesia may lose large portions of their life story, yet they still feel like someone. This suggests that memory is not the essence of self. Beneath memory lies something more fundamental, the raw awareness of being. This awareness does not depend on past or future. It exists now, always now. Perhaps death strips away memory but leaves awareness intact. To reunite with yourself would then mean discovering that the core of you was never your memories at all, but the simple, indestructible presence of consciousness. Some thinkers compare this to the sky and the clouds. Memories, thoughts, and identities are clouds, changing, moving, appearing, and disappearing. Awareness is the sky itself, vast, open, unchanging. At death, the clouds may dissolve, but the sky remains. The reunion with yourself might be nothing more and nothing less than realizing you are the sky, not the passing clouds. This resonates with reports from near-death experiences. Many people describe a life review in which they not only see their memories, but experience them from multiple perspectives. They feel what others felt, they see the ripple effects of their actions. What stands out is not the preservation of memory in the ordinary sense, but the expansion of perspective. Memory becomes less about holding on to personal details and more about integrating into a larger whole. In that integration, reunion occurs, not as clinging to the small self, but as embracing the larger truth of interconnectedness. From a psychological perspective, this makes sense. Much of our suffering in life comes from fragmentation. Parts of ourselves we deny, ignore, or suppress. In therapy, healing often comes when those parts are acknowledged and reintegrated. Death may represent the final stage of this process, when all fragments are gathered back into wholeness. To reunite with yourself after death could mean facing and embracing every aspect of who you have been, without judgment, without fear. It would be the ultimate healing, the final integration. But integration doesn't only apply to personal life. If consciousness is truly fundamental, then reunion may extend beyond the individual. Think of waves on the ocean. Each wave has a shape, a movement, an identity. But when the wave falls back into the sea, it reunites not only with its own essence, but with all waves, past and future. If death is like this, then to reunite with yourself is also to reunite with all consciousness, to recognize that what you thought was you was never separate to begin with. This brings us to the question of individuality. Is individuality preserved after death, or does it dissolve? Different traditions give different answers. Some suggest the soul retains individuality, carrying memories and personality into the afterlife. Others suggest individuality dissolves, leaving only the universal. Perhaps both are true. Imagine that individuality is like a costume worn in a play. After the play ends, the costume is taken off. The character is gone, but the actor remains. The reunion is not with the character, but with the actor, the deeper identity that was playing all along. This actor analogy helps us see life in a new way. If you are the actor, then every life, every experience is a role. Death is the curtain call, when the actor steps out of character and remembers who they really are. To reunite with yourself after death would be the moment of recognition. I was never just that character. I was always more. Modern science, though cautious, does not completely rule out these possibilities. Consciousness remains a mystery. Some researchers suggest it may not be confined to the brain, but may be a fundamental aspect of reality itself. If so, then death may not end consciousness, but release it from the limitations of the body. What emerges may not be the personal self in the way we imagine, but something deeper. Reunion, then, is not a continuation of the story, but the recognition of the storyteller. Consider also the role of perception. Right now, you experience reality through the filter of human senses: sight, sound, touch, taste, smell. But these senses reveal only a fraction of what exists. For example, you cannot see infrared or ultraviolet light without technology, though they surround you. If death means the end of these filters, could it also mean the opening to a greater perception? To reunite with yourself might mean to perceive reality not through the narrow lens of human senses, but in its totality. What you discover could feel like remembering, as though you always knew but had forgotten. There is also the question of identity across lives. If reincarnation is real, then reunion with yourself after death may mean rediscovering not just this life, but many. Imagine awakening to the realization that you have lived countless times in countless forms. Each life is a thread, and death is when you see the entire tapestry. The reunion would be breathtaking, not just a return to oneself, but to the vastness of all selves you have ever been. Even if reincarnation is not literally true, the metaphor holds. In a single lifetime, you already live many lives. The child you once were feels distant from the adult you are now. In some ways, that child is gone, yet they remain as part of you. Life is full of small deaths and rebirths, phases, roles, identities that come and go. To reunite with yourself after death may simply be the culmination of this process, the final gathering of all your many selves into wholeness. Art and literature often explore this idea. From ancient epics to modern films, stories of transformation and return repeat again and again. The hero leaves home, undergoes trials, and eventually returns, not as the same person, but as someone transformed, carrying new wisdom. Death can be seen as the ultimate return home, the final chapter in the hero's journey. The reunion is not about preservation, but about transformation into a greater truth. And what about love? For many, the hope of life after death is not only about preserving the self, but about reuniting with loved ones. If consciousness is interconnected, then perhaps reunion after death means realizing that separation was always an illusion. The love you shared was never lost, because the deeper self was never divided. To reunite with yourself may also mean to reunite with others, discovering that at the deepest level, self and other were never truly separate. What if the truth lies outside of anything we can picture? If reuniting with yourself is the central mystery, then perhaps it is not about going somewhere, but about encountering a reality so expansive that our current language and thought cannot capture it. To even begin to explore this, we must look at consciousness not only as something personal, but as something universal. Modern neuroscience tells us that consciousness is deeply tied to the brain, and yet the exact mechanism remains elusive. Neurons fire, patterns form, and somehow awareness arises. But no one can fully explain why it feels like something to be alive, to experience joy, sorrow, curiosity, or fear. This mystery is called the hard problem of consciousness. If scientists cannot explain consciousness in life, how can they explain it in death? And if it does not depend solely on the physical brain, then perhaps it does not end when the brain shuts down. Consider the analogy of a radio. The radio produces music, but it is not the source of the music. The music comes from waves in the air, invisible and pervasive, and the radio merely tunes into them. If the radio breaks, the music does not end. It simply stops being played on that device. In the same way, some thinkers suggest that the brain is not the source of consciousness, but the receiver of it. Death, then, would not mean the end of consciousness, but the end of one channel of expression. The music of awareness continues. To reunite with yourself after death may mean to step out of the limits of one channel and merge back into the infinite field of consciousness itself. This idea finds echoes in quantum physics, where observation appears to play a role in reality itself. Experiments show that particles behave differently depending on whether they are observed. This has led some to suggest that consciousness is woven into the very fabric of the universe, inseparable from matter and energy. If consciousness is not a byproduct of the brain, but a fundamental aspect of reality, then death does not destroy it. Instead, it might reveal its broader, universal nature. To reunite with yourself in this sense is to awaken to the truth that your consciousness was never isolated, never separate, but part of the universe itself. Philosophers have long wrestled with this. René Descartes declared, "I think, therefore I am," grounding selfhood in thought. But what if thought is only the surface? Deeper than thought is awareness itself, the silent witness that observes thought. This awareness does not think, does not analyze, does not judge. It simply is. Many spiritual traditions describe it as timeless, boundless, and indestructible. If that is true, then death may strip away thought, but not awareness. The reunion would be with the pure I am that has always been present beneath the noise of the mind. Mystics often describe this experience as union with the divine. In Christian mysticism, it is called the beatific vision, a direct experience of God beyond form. In Sufi tradition, it is fana, the annihilation of the self in divine love. In Buddhism, it is nirvana, the extinguishing of illusion and the recognition of ultimate truth. These traditions, while using different language, describe the same essence, the dissolution of the limited self and the reunion with the infinite. Death, then, is not a loss, but a return, like a drop of water rejoining the ocean. Yet this does not necessarily mean individuality vanishes completely. Some accounts suggest that even within unity, there is recognition, a sense of continuity, a remembrance of the journey. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast ocean, realizing you are part of it, yet still aware that you are also a wave that has travelled across it. Reunion, then, is not erasure, but fulfillment. It is realizing you are both the wave and the ocean, both the individual and the universal. Let us think about identity in this way. In life, we often cling to labels. We say, I am this kind of person. I am defined by my memories, my achievements, my struggles, but these labels are temporary. As life progresses, they change. A child grows into an adult grows into an elder. Roles shift, identities evolve. At death, perhaps all these labels fall away, and what remains is not a story, but the essence of the storyteller. That essence may be what you reunite with, the core of being, untouched by time, roles, or names. Near-death experiences again provide intriguing glimpses. Many who undergo them report feeling expanded, as though they were no longer confined to the body. They describe light, peace, and overwhelming love. Some meet beings they interpret as guides, others encounter deceased relatives, and many say they felt more alive than ever before. Crucially, they often return with a sense that their true self is far greater than their everyday identity. These reports suggest that death may reveal dimensions of self that remain hidden in life. The reunion would be the lifting of a veil, the revelation of what was always there. But we can also consider this from a psychological angle. Carl Jung spoke of the self as the totality of the psyche, larger than the ego. The ego is the conscious part of us, the identity we usually live through. But the self includes the unconscious, the shadow, the archetypes that shape us. Jung believed individuation, the process of becoming whole, involved uniting the ego with the self. In a way, death could be seen as the final individuation, the ultimate merging of ego with self. To reunite with yourself after death would then mean becoming whole beyond the limits of the conscious mind. Another perspective comes from the study of altered states of consciousness. Psychedelic experiences, for example, often dissolve the boundaries of self, leading to a sense of unity with the universe. Users report a feeling of having touched something eternal, of recognizing themselves as more than their physical form. These experiences can feel like rehearsals for death, moments when the ordinary self dissolves and a greater self is revealed. If this is so, then death may be the final and most complete version of this dissolution. The reunion would be the embrace of the boundless. Of course, not everyone finds comfort in these ideas. For some, the loss of individuality feels like annihilation. They want to believe that they, as they are now, will persist forever. But perhaps reunion is not about preserving the small self, but about discovering the joy of being more than that. If you were a wave, would you fear rejoining the ocean? Or would you rejoice in becoming vast, limitless, infinite? The fear may come from identifying too tightly with the temporary form, forgetting the ocean that is your true nature. Science fiction often plays with these themes. Stories of uploading consciousness, parallel universes, or collective minds explore what it would mean to transcend individuality. While these are speculative, they point to a deeper intuition that selfhood is more flexible, more mysterious than we imagine. If reality allows for such possibilities in imagination, who is to say it cannot allow for them in truth? Perhaps reuniting with yourself after death is stranger, more beautiful, and more unimaginable than any fiction can portray. And yet, even if we cannot know for certain, the very act of contemplating these mysteries changes how we live. If you consider that death may not be the end, but a reunion, then life becomes less about clinging and more about exploring, less about fear and more about discovery. Every moment becomes a chance to glimpse the deeper self that will one day be fully revealed. Who is the self we are meant to reunite with? Is it the person we are today? Is it the sum of all our lives? Is it something beyond individuality altogether? Perhaps the answer depends on how we define self in the first place. Throughout history, different cultures have defined the self in radically different ways. In much of Western thought, the self has been seen as the conscious ego, the I that makes decisions, thinks thoughts, and narrates experience. This is the self most people identify with from day to day. But psychology has shown us that the ego is only a small portion of the mind. Beneath it lies the unconscious, instincts, patterns, and forgotten experiences that shape behavior without awareness. Beneath even that, some argue, lies the collective unconscious, a shared field of archetypes and symbols that connects us all. If the self is this vast, multi-layered structure, then reuniting with yourself after death might mean descending through all these levels until you touch the deepest foundation, the root from which individuality springs. In Eastern traditions, the self is often seen quite differently. Buddhism, for example, teaches the doctrine of anatta, no self. What we call the self is not a permanent entity, but a collection of constantly changing processes. Thoughts, feelings, perceptions, sensations. These processes arise and fade moment by moment, like ripples on a pond. To cling to them as me is to misunderstand their impermanence. From this perspective, the idea of reuniting with yourself after death is paradoxical. There is no permanent self to reunite with, but at the same time, liberation comes when we see through the illusion of self and awaken to the deeper truth of interconnectedness. In that sense, the reunion is the realization that you are never separate to begin with. Hindu philosophy, on the other hand, affirms the existence of Atman, the eternal self. This self is not the ego, not the personality, but the divine essence within. Atman is identical to Brahman, the ultimate reality. To reunite with yourself after death from this view is to shed the temporary roles and awaken fully as Atman, recognizing your identity with the infinite. It is less a reunion than a revelation, the discovery that what you truly are has never been born and can never die. Indigenous traditions also offer rich insights. Many see the self as inseparable from community, land, and ancestors. Identity is not confined to the individual, but extends outward, rooted in relationship. Death, therefore, is not an ending, but a return to the larger circle of life, where the self is reunited with ancestors and with the living earth. Here, the reunion is not just with oneself, but with the larger web of being of which one has always been a part. When we place these perspectives side by side, a pattern emerges. In each, the self is not what it seems in daily life. Whether viewed as an illusion, a divine essence, or a network of relationships, the self is more than the fragile ego. Death, then, becomes a process of seeing through the surface and awakening to the deeper truth. The reunion is with that truth, not with the small story we usually cling to. But what about continuity? Many people long to believe that they will remain who they are after death, that their personality, memories, and identity will endure. This longing is deeply human, and it fuels much of our imagination about the afterlife, heaven, reincarnation, spirit worlds. These all speak to the desire for continuity. Yet even here, the idea of reunion suggests something more than simple preservation. It suggests transformation, expansion, integration. Take reincarnation, for example. If we live multiple lives, each with a different personality, then who is the real you? Is it the person you are now, or the totality of all your lives? To reunite with yourself after death might mean realizing that all those lives were threads in one great tapestry. The self that reincarnates is not the small personality, but the deeper soul that experiences through many forms. The reunion would be with that deeper soul, the traveler behind all the journeys. In Christian theology, resurrection is sometimes understood in a similar way. The body may die, but the soul persists. In some interpretations, the resurrection body is not the physical body as we know it, but a transformed spiritual body. This suggests that the continuity of self after death is not about clinging to the exact form we have now, but about awakening to a higher, more complete form. Again, reunion is not mere survival, but transformation. Modern psychology also supports this view. We are not static beings, but constantly changing. The person you are today is not the same as the person you were 10 years ago. Your values shift, your memories fade, your personality evolves, and yet you feel a sense of continuity. That continuity arises not from sameness, but from integration, the weaving together of all the changes into a coherent whole. Death may be the final stage of this process, when all the pieces are woven together into a larger unity. To reunite with yourself would be to see that wholeness fully at last. Dreams provide another fascinating lens. In dreams, we often meet versions of ourselves: childhood selves, idealized selves, shadow selves. Dreams dissolve the rigid boundaries of identity, allowing us to encounter our own multiplicity. Death may be like a final dream, in which all versions of the self converge. The reunion could be the moment when all these dream selves are recognized as aspects of one greater reality. Some scientists speculate about parallel universes and the multiverse. If infinite versions of reality exist, then infinite versions of you exist as well. Every choice you could have made, every path you could have taken, is played out somewhere. If death opens the door to higher dimensions, could it mean reuniting with all those alternate selves? Imagine meeting not just who you were, but who you could have been. The reunion would be staggering, a cosmic gathering of every possibility of you. This idea may sound like science fiction, but it mirrors the psychological truth that we already contain multitudes. Every person carries unexpressed potentials, dreams never pursued, choices never made. These latent selves live within us, shaping our desires and regrets. To reunite with yourself after death might mean embracing not only who you were, but who you could have been, integrating all possible versions into a greater whole. Love, once again, is central to this vision. If the deepest truth of the self is interconnectedness, then reunion with yourself after death cannot be separated from reunion with others. To rediscover your essence is to rediscover the essence of everyone else. The boundaries fall away, revealing the unity beneath. Love is the recognition of that unity, the glimpse of reunion while still alive. Death may be the moment when that glimpse becomes a full vision. Of course, all of this remains a mystery. Science cannot confirm these possibilities, and philosophy can only speculate, but the mystery itself is valuable. To ask whether we reunite with ourselves after death is to be drawn into reflection, into humility, into wonder. It opens us to the possibility that life is far greater and death far more profound than we usually imagine. And perhaps this is the point. Whether or not we can know for certain, the very act of considering reunion transforms how we live. If death is not an end but a homecoming, then life is not a struggle to cling, but an opportunity to awaken. Each moment becomes a rehearsal for reunion, a chance to know ourselves more deeply, to love more fully, to integrate more completely. What would it be like to awaken into the vastness of your own being? Would it feel like coming home after a long journey? Would it feel like remembering something you had always known but forgotten? Or would it be so unfamiliar that it cannot be described in the language of human experience? To begin, let us look at the phenomenon of ego death, often described in mystical or altered states. Ego death is the dissolution of the sense of being a separate, individual self. People who undergo this describe a profound release. Fear vanishes, boundaries dissolve, and what remains is a sense of unity, peace, and boundless presence. If death involves something similar, then the reunion with yourself may not feel like meeting a familiar version of you, but like dissolving into something far greater. It would not be recognition in the ordinary sense, but immersion in the source. Consider how rivers flow into the sea. A river has an identity. It can be named, mapped, and followed. But when it reaches the sea, its boundaries vanish. The river is no longer distinct, yet it is not lost. It has become part of something immeasurably vast. Perhaps the self is like that river. In life, it has boundaries, personality, memory, form. In death, those boundaries dissolve, but the essence continues, reunited with the ocean of being. For the river, this is not a loss, but a fulfillment. It has found its destination. But not all perspectives imagine the self dissolving completely. Some accounts describe continuity, even after death. Near-death experiencers often report encountering environments that feel both familiar and transformed. Landscapes of light, cities, or gardens. They sometimes meet loved ones who have passed, still recognizable, still themselves. In these accounts, reunion is not the vanishing of individuality, but the confirmation of it. The self persists, but in an expanded state. Death, then, is not annihilation, but amplification, a movement into a more vivid, more alive existence. How can we reconcile these different views? Perhaps the self is multi-layered, and death reveals those layers. On one level, individuality may persist, memories, identity, personality. On a deeper level, individuality dissolves into unity, both true depending on perspective. Imagine peeling an onion. Each layer is part of the whole, but the essence lies at the core. Death may be the peeling away of layers, revealing the core, while still allowing the outer layers to have meaning. The reunion, then, is with the whole onion, the entirety of who and what you are. This layered view aligns with many traditions. Tibetan Buddhism, for example, describes stages of the after-death experience known as the bardo. In these stages, the self encounters visions that reflect its own mind. Peaceful deities, wrathful deities, illusions, and opportunities for liberation. At each stage, there is a choice, to cling to identity and illusion, or to awaken to the deeper truth of awareness. Reunion, in this framework, is the recognition that all experiences, even after death, arise from the mind itself. Liberation comes not from clinging to self, but from recognizing the self as boundless awareness. But what about those who fear death? Fear often arises from the unknown. If we believe death is annihilation, we fear losing ourselves. If we believe it is judgment, we fear punishment. Yet if death is reunion, perhaps fear itself dissolves. The reunion would not be terrifying but comforting, like returning to a place of safety and belonging. This is why so many near-death experiencers describe overwhelming peace and love, even when the process itself is dramatic. They sense that nothing essential is lost, that the core of who they are remains untouched. Psychologically, this makes sense. Much of human life is spent searching for belonging, for connection, for wholeness. We feel fragmented, incomplete, as though something is missing. What if death is the resolution of that longing? The discovery that we were never truly separate, never truly incomplete. The reunion with yourself after death would then be the fulfillment of life's deepest yearning. To be whole, to be at peace, to be home. Interestingly, this idea appears in art and literature across cultures. Myths of the underworld often describe journeys not just to places of shadow, but to places of truth and restoration. Heroes who descend into the underworld often emerge transformed, having discovered a deeper self. Orpheus, Dante, Gilgamesh all undergo this journey. The descent into death is paired with the discovery of something essential. The reunion is not just personal, but universal. The recognition of truths that apply to all humanity. Modern accounts of spiritual experiences echo this pattern. People who meditate deeply, who fast, or who spend time in solitude often report glimpses of a greater self. They describe moments of clarity, of connection, of union. These experiences are often fleeting, but they leave lasting impressions. If death magnifies this process, then the reunion with yourself after death might be the permanent version of what mystics and seekers taste only briefly in life. Another angle is the relationship between self and time. Right now, we experience time as a sequence: past, present, future. But if time is an illusion, as some theories suggest, then all moments exist simultaneously. Death might not be the end of a timeline, but the lifting of the veil that hides the simultaneity of existence. To reunite with yourself after death could mean to experience all your moments at once, to see your entire life and perhaps many lives as a single whole. The reunion would be with the totality of your existence, beyond the trick of linear time. Imagine standing outside a tapestry. Up close, you see only threads. Step back, and the pattern emerges. Life feels like the close-up view, one thread at a time. Death may be the moment you step back and see the entire design. The reunion would be with the complete picture, the recognition that every thread, even the dark ones, had a place in the whole. Science cannot prove this, of course, but it offers hints. Quantum theory suggests that particles exist in states of potential until observed. Reality may be far stranger than our linear minds can grasp. If observation shapes reality, then death, when the observer changes, might reveal new dimensions of existence. Consciousness may shift from local to non-local, from bound to unbound. Reunion would then be not only personal, but cosmic, the recognition of your participation in the fundamental nature of reality. And yet reunion may not mean final answers. It may mean the discovery that the self is infinite, that there is always more to explore, more to integrate, more to become. Perhaps death is not the end of the journey, but a transition into a greater journey, one that continues beyond imagination. Reunion, then, is not closure, but expansion. It is the moment the horizon opens and the journey becomes boundless. What does this mean for life now? If reunion is real, then life is not about clinging to the temporary, but about preparing for integration. Every act of self-discovery, every moment of love, every step toward wholeness becomes part of the reunion. Life is practice, each moment a chance to remember, to awaken, to glimpse the truth that death will fully reveal. Another question rises naturally. What part of you survives? Is it memory, personality, essence, or something deeper that cannot even be named? To explore this, we must look at the many ways humans have understood identity and what it means to endure beyond the physical body. First, consider memory. Much of what we think of as our selves is tied to memory. We know who we are because we recall where we have been, what we have done, and who we have loved. If death were the erasure of memory, would that mean the erasure of self? Some traditions say yes, but others argue that memory is only one layer, not the essence. Imagine burning a book. The physical pages are gone, but the story is not erased if it still exists in the minds of readers. Perhaps death is like that. Memory as we know it fades, but the essence of experience is preserved in a deeper archive, one beyond the brain. This is echoed in accounts of the so-called life review during near-death experiences. People often describe seeing their entire life replay before them, not as a dry record, but as a vivid reliving. What is striking is that they do not just recall their actions, they feel them from the perspective of others. If they caused joy, they feel the joy. If they caused pain, they feel the pain. It suggests that memory is not personal, but relational, woven into a larger network. The reunion after death may therefore not be with your private collection of memories, but with the living web of all the experiences you have generated and shared. But memory is not the only candidate. Personality, the traits that make you unique, could also endure. The way you think, the way you respond, your humor, your temperament, these define you in life. In spiritualist traditions, mediums claim to contact personalities of the deceased, still recognizable, still themselves, only without physical form. If true, this suggests that personality can survive as a kind of energetic imprint. Death would then be less like erasure and more like translation, shifting the pattern of who you are into a new medium. Just as a song can be played on a violin, a piano, or a guitar, and still be the same melody, perhaps you can exist in different forms, each carrying the tune of your personality. And then there is essence, something harder to define. Essence is not memory or personality, but the core presence, the I am, that persists even when the details change. You are not the same as you were as a child, yet something continuous runs through all your stages of life. That thread of continuity may be what endures after death. If reunion is possible, perhaps it is the recognition of that essence, the realization that the part of you which never changed in life also cannot be destroyed in death. This idea aligns with the notion of the soul in many traditions. The soul is described as eternal, unchanging, indestructible. It is not the details, but the root. Reunion in this sense would be the soul rediscovering itself, remembering its nature beyond the temporary roles it played in one lifetime. In Hindu thought, this is the realization of Atman, the individual soul, as not separate from Brahman, the universal reality. To reunite with yourself after death is to awaken to the fact that your essence was never apart from the infinite. But if essence persists, what happens to the individual self, the person with quirks and flaws and memories? Some traditions hold that individuality eventually dissolves, while others suggest it continues indefinitely. The answer may depend on perspective. From the human side, individuality feels central. From the cosmic side, individuality may be like a wave on the ocean, beautiful, distinct, but destined to return to the water. Does the wave lose itself when it becomes ocean again? Or does it fulfill itself? The reunion may be both the end of individuality and the perfection of it, depending on how you view it. This raises another important possibility, that the self after death may not be static but evolving. Just as life is a journey of growth, perhaps death opens into further stages of growth. Philosophers and mystics across ages have speculated about this, what some call the continuity of consciousness. The idea is that death does not freeze you as you are, but allows you to expand, to evolve, to integrate. In this view, reunion with yourself after death would not be a one-time event, but an ongoing process, an infinite unfolding. For example, imagine carrying unresolved emotions or questions into death. Perhaps the reunion involves facing them fully, not with fear, but with clarity. Some near-death accounts describe this. People feel they are embraced by love so total that even their darkest moments are understood, forgiven, integrated. If so, then the reunion is healing. It is the chance to meet all the parts of yourself, even the ones you avoided in life, and bring them into wholeness. Death becomes not punishment, but restoration, a radical acceptance of the self in its entirety. Another layer to consider is the role of connection with others. Are you truly only yourself, or are you partly everyone you have ever touched? If death reveals the truth of interconnectedness, then reunion with yourself may also mean reunion with others. You might find that the boundary between you and them was never absolute. In recognizing your deeper self, you may also recognize the shared self that runs through all beings. Reunion, then, would not be solitary but collective. A homecoming not just to yourself, but to the whole of existence. This idea is supported by some of the most profound mystical experiences recorded in history. Mystics often report visions of unity, where self and other, subject and object, dissolve into a single awareness. They describe it not as losing themselves, but as gaining a deeper truth, one that feels more real than ordinary perception. If death carries us into such a state, then reunion is not about meeting an old self, but about dissolving the illusion of separation altogether. It is the realization that there is only one self, expressing itself in countless forms. But such ideas are not without their challenges. If individuality dissolves, then what of justice? What of the idea that we are accountable for our actions? Traditions that emphasize moral order, like Christianity or Islam, lean toward a view where individuality persists, at least long enough to face judgment or reward. This suggests that reunion may be partial. The soul returns to its source eventually, but individuality continues long enough for lessons, accountability, or growth to play out. Death is then not an erasure, but a school, a place of learning before the final reunion. Some thinkers propose an even stranger possibility, that death reveals not just one self, but many. If consciousness is larger than a single lifetime, then perhaps each incarnation is like a chapter in a much larger story. Reunion after death may mean reuniting not just with your present self, but with all the versions of you that have ever existed across time. Imagine meeting not only who you were in this life, but who you have been in countless others. Each self might feel distinct, yet all are facets of the same jewel. The reunion would then be vast, an embrace of all the selves that together make up the greater you. This idea resonates with reincarnation traditions. In Hinduism and Buddhism, the soul travels through many lives, gathering experiences, learning lessons. Death is a transition, not an end. Reunion could therefore mean regathering the wisdom of all lives, merging them into a single awareness. Some who practice deep meditation even claim glimpses of these other lives, suggesting that the boundaries of self may be more porous than we realize. If true, then death is the moment the partitions fall away, and the greater story becomes visible. Science cannot confirm these possibilities, but it can contribute questions. Neuroscience shows us how fragile our sense of self is, dependent on brain chemistry, vulnerable to injury, altered by disease. Yet the very fragility of the self may point to something deeper. If identity can shift so easily in life, then perhaps it is not bound to the body at all. Perhaps the body is simply a lens, and death is the moment when the lens is set aside, allowing consciousness to perceive without limits. This becomes less of a question about whether you disappear and more of a question about what kind of existence continues. Is it memory, personality, or essence? Is it the continuation of individuality or the expansion into something far larger than we can comprehend? Each perspective we've travelled through, spiritual traditions, near-death accounts, philosophical reasoning, and scientific possibilities, paints a piece of the picture. No single perspective claims the whole truth, but when placed side by side, they suggest something profound, that death may not be the end of self, but a transformation of it, a transition, a return, or a revelation. If the self is memory, then perhaps death reveals memory in a way beyond the limits of the brain, where every action, every feeling, and every connection lives on in a shared tapestry of experience. If the self is personality, then perhaps death preserves the unique melody of who you are, translating it into a new medium where it still resonates. If the self is essence, then perhaps death simply removes the masks, revealing the unchanging root of I am that cannot be harmed or destroyed. But perhaps it is not one or the other. Perhaps it is all of these, woven together in a way we cannot fully grasp until the moment comes. Death might allow us to experience continuity, transformation, and reunion all at once. It might reveal that the self is not a single thing, but a spectrum, from the smallest details of individuality to the boundless presence of universal awareness. Reunion, then, is not about choosing one version of yourself, but embracing the entire spectrum, seeing that nothing was ever separate, nothing was ever lost. Imagine stepping into a great hall of mirrors. At first, you see yourself as you knew in life, familiar features, recognizable expressions. Then the mirrors expand, showing you at every age, every stage, every possibility. You see the child you once were, the elder you might have become, the faces from lives perhaps long forgotten. And beyond those, you see reflections that stretch beyond time itself, versions of yourself that are not bound by form at all. At first, this might seem overwhelming, but then you realize that all these mirrors are simply facets of the same light. The reunion is not with fragments, but with the one light that shines through them all. The truth of reunion may also be less about explanation and more about experience. Words and theories can point toward it, but the actual moment of death may transcend description entirely. As with dreams, you may know something deeply when you are in it, even if you cannot explain it upon waking. Reunion might be like that, a knowing beyond words, a recognition beyond logic. It may feel less like an answer and more like a homecoming. And what of fear? Perhaps reunion dissolves it. Fear is born of separation, of thinking we can lose ourselves, lose what we love, lose everything. If reunion means nothing essential is lost, then fear has no foundation. Death becomes not an abyss, but a doorway, not darkness, but opening. Reunion would then be the realization that life and death are not opposites, but phases of the same unfolding. The implications for living are immense. If death is reunion, then life is not about clinging, but about preparing, remembering, awakening. Every act of compassion, every step towards self-knowledge, every moment of presence is already part of the reunion. Death does not wait at the end. It weaves through life in every moment of awakening. To glimpse wholeness now is to taste in advance what death may fully reveal. This perspective can transform how we see our daily struggles. Instead of viewing life as a race against time, we can see it as a journey of remembering. Instead of fearing what comes after, we can find peace in knowing that we are always moving toward greater wholeness. The reunion with yourself after death may not be something to dread, but something to trust, an inevitable return to what you have always been. Even science, though cautious, offers intriguing parallels. The conservation of energy tells us that nothing is truly destroyed, only transformed. The matter and energy that make up our bodies will persist in new forms long after we are gone. Why not consciousness as well? If energy transforms, then perhaps awareness transforms too, shifting from the narrow lens of the body into a broader field we cannot yet measure. The reunion would then be not mystical but natural, part of the same principle that governs stars and rivers and seasons. And so, as we close this long exploration, we find ourselves at a threshold. The question is not settled, and perhaps it never will be. Not while we are alive. But in that uncertainty lies wonder, and in wonder lies possibility. Whether death brings dissolution, continuation, or revelation, the idea of reunion invites us to live with more openness, more compassion, more curiosity. Perhaps the reunion after death is not an event that waits for us, but a truth that has always been present. Perhaps we are already united with ourselves, already whole, and death simply removes the veil that keeps us from seeing it. In that sense, the reunion is not something to come, but something to recognize now. That you are more than your body, more than your memories, more than your fears. You are part of something vast, something eternal, something unbroken. Hello everyone, this brings us to the end of tonight's journey. We've travelled far into questions of identity, memory, essence, and the mysteries of what may come after life. Whether death is a reunion, a transformation, or something beyond words, it offers us an opportunity to reflect deeply on what it means to be alive now. And as you settle into rest, remember that exploring these mysteries is not about answers alone, but about peace. Here at Sleep Space, we invite you to let these thoughts drift into the background, to release the weight of questions, and to surrender to the calm of the present moment. Sleep gently, and may your dreams carry you to places of wonder